Welcome back to How to Craft Fair. This is the fourth installment in the Craft Fair Q&A series where I had channel members submit questions to me that I can answer and hopefully help out with. And hopefully these are some topics that apply to situations that you might be in. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this episode. Okay, so the first question is going to come from Megan, and it's kind of like a two-part question. So she's asking how to make the most of the space you have at your booth, whether it's an 8x8 or a 10x10 or whatever you have to work with. The second part of her question is, and if there's a way to make things appear that you have a lot to offer, if you only have a few specific products available to display. Okay, so let's break this down into two segments. The first thing that we're going to talk about is making the most of your space. The biggest thing that I can suggest is to utilize vertical space at your booth. If you're limited on space from side to side or from front to back, think of all that you can do at your booth when you go up and down. Okay, so that space is going to be where you're going to be able to kind of get your biggest bang for your buck for displaying and all that. And when it comes to vertical space, it's really tempting to just think about up, like going up. So like basically from your tabletop and going up, but you also have to consider what you can do working your way downwards. All right. So like I said, working your way up is very easy. You can get taller displays and racks for tables or just standing racks. Some people use like the top of their tent canopies. So like at an outdoor show, when you walk into a tent, you'll see that bracing on the inside of a canopy. And a lot of people use that bracing like either to attach props and decor or lighting, or sometimes they'll even like have products that can hang from that bracing. So it's really easy to think about all the ways that you can use your vertical space going up, but think about what you can do when you go below the table level. Um, you can save space on your tabletops, for instance, by maybe using those lower areas for like signage, either signage that's like relative to your items that you have, or maybe some kind of special deals, like maybe you're doing like 10% off at this particular event, or you can advertise like your bundle pricing at a sign that's kind of lower and maybe leaning up against the table. Maybe you can have something like buy two products, get your third free, or just whatever. Also, don't forget about your marketing sign. So think about table runners that hang down off towards the bottom of the table for your marketing, like your business logo, your business name. Maybe you have like a catchphrase. Maybe it's even some sort of a sign that says like 100% handmade or locally handcrafted or things like that. These are just some examples of ways that you can use these lower vertical elements at your booth. Okay, so it's not just about going as high as possible, but also utilize the space that maybe people kind of forget about because they're so concerned about, building upwards. Another thing you can do kind of on the lower half of a booth, maybe tucked into the corners, especially for you people that have like a canopy on a 10x10. Sometimes there's like underutilized corners, and you can use that space for props and decor to sort of reestablish and reaffirm a theme. Maybe it's a certain time of year. Okay, so maybe it's like a harvest festival where you can put like a corn stalk or like a little hay bale or maybe a pumpkin or something like that. Just kind of fill in these little spaces to help not only, like I said, fill out the space vertically, but just also make it like a cozy atmosphere and to get the most bang for your buck for the space that you have. Like we said, an 8x8 or a 10x10, things like that. So just consider all these things. And I know that sometimes our space is limited from side to side or front to back, but just don't forget about your vertical space up and down. All right, now let's move on to the second half of Megan's question, which was What are some good ways to make your booth appear that you have a lot to offer if you actually only have a few specific products? Okay, so sometimes we see this where vendors will only have maybe like two or three designs. So to fill out a booth when you only have a few products, you want to make sure that you have nice displays that take up some space at the booth. Okay, so this is where you're going to want to incorporate maybe some shelves, some risers. Wooden crates are another really nice option to kind of just take up some visual real estate at the booth and fill it in a little bit. Basically, you want to fill your booth out with some tasteful decor that fits your theme as well. So, like we talked about in the previous part of the question, if it's a certain time of year, you can inject some decor that's relative to the time of year. Maybe it doesn't have to be tied to a certain time of year, like the corn stalk example, or maybe it's like a 4th of July thing, like you red, white, and blue. There's those options, but you can also have decor that is tied into your products. Okay. So, just for an example, I had one vendor one time. She made soaps and candles and certain like bath and body type of products, and she used lavender that was like locally sourced from her family's farm. Okay, so they actually had like fields of lavender and all that. Well, that's actually like an element that you can bring into the booth as well. You can actually bring some in physically and maybe have like some tied up in some sections, and that would be like a really really nice application of like a prop and decor that fits, and it's tied into the theme of the product itself and not necessarily like a holiday or a certain time of year. Okay, so think about the certain time of year as like an easy way to put some props and decor into your booth, but then also like your product itself, like what things do you think of as like a physical item that you can bring into your booth that would support the vibe and the feel of the products that you sell. Okay, so adding these things to your booth can help to fill it out, especially when you don't have a lot of items to offer. Okay, so this is where you want to kind of help fill the booth in a little bit. But you can also have variations of your products. Okay, so let's say, for example, you only sell, I keep talking about like candles and soaps and things like that just because it's like an easy example to work with you guys. So let's say you're a soap maker, okay, and your two main products are bars of soap and then bath bombs. Okay, those are your two items. Well, you're gonna have the option to have like different scents and maybe different textures of soap, where there's like a grainier type of soap, or maybe it's just like a smooth like aloe type of soap. So you want to think about the different variations that you can have of your items. Okay, so like I said, maybe if you only have like two designs, can they come in different colors? Can they come in different scents? Can you make them from different fabrics, like different textures? Make sure to display all varieties of your products, because maybe certain people will be attracted to certain things even if there's only two different designs. Okay, so you're kind of putting you're pushing all your chips out onto the table, and you're giving it your best shot with only a couple of different designs. Also, this is a really good opportunity to consider having a customization area at your booth. So you can have a sign that says, "Yes, I offer customizations," or "Ask me about customizations" is another nice way to phrase a sign. You want to have a sign that kind of like sparks the conversation, but you're not giving away all the detail. This is going to start to get you engaged with shoppers, and it's nice to start a dialogue. Okay, so the more that shoppers open up to you and start asking you questions and things like that, the more likely you are to make a connection with them and, hopefully generate some sales. So, having customization options when you only have a couple of different products is a really nice way to spark some sales that might not have happened if the shoppers didn't know that they can customize the items that you have. Okay. Customization is also another great way to keep sales going in between craft fairs. So, you might establish a connection with somebody at a craft fair, and definitely give them your business card and some kind of way for them to reach out to you. And later on, you might be surprised that they can contact you and, like I said, generate those sales in between events, which, that's priceless. Basically, that's just kind of icing on the cake and bonus sales on top of whatever you happen to do that day with your physical products that you had on hand. So these are just some various ways that you can fill out your booth. If you want a customization form, because there's a lot of things to keep in mind when you're offering customization, you guys. You can't just basically like wing it. You want to have like some structure to your customization. So the things that you're going to want to have covered are the price, the agreed upon price, the design itself. So you want to have a description of the design, the time frame that it can be completed by to give the buyer some sort of expectation of when they can receive their product, the shipping method or the delivery method. So maybe it can be picked up at another show, or maybe you'll ship it out for like an additional fee or whatever. There's a lot of different things that need to be established for a custom order. So if you need help with that, check out the link in the description below in the video, and I have an Etsy link that goes directly to my custom order form. Okay, it's like $1 or $1.20, something like that, but you can download it and reuse it and just print it out as many times as you need for like the $1.19 or whatever it is. But that's a really nice way to make your customization area at your booth look really presentable and professional, and to make sure, most importantly, that you're on the same page with the buyer to have all those expectations set and agreed upon between you and the buyer. All right, so now we got a couple of questions from Danielle, and her first is, what is the best place to find virtual vendor events? I've read a few comments about them, but I can't seem to find them online. Is this still a thing post-pandemic? So, as most of you know, in late 2020 and throughout a good portion of 2021, in-person events were kind of limited. They were sometimes being postponed or just outright canceled because a lot of states, a lot of counties had like mass gathering restrictions where you couldn't have 1,000 people all in one building at the same time. So the craft fair industry was kind of just adapting with the local rules, laws, and regulations that were coming about at that time. So one of the things that was happening was there was a lot of these virtual vendor events popping up as an alternative where vendors could basically pay a fee and get into a virtual craft fair where they could present their items, and there would be buyers kind of viewing this virtual event ready to make purchases. Okay. So I think it was okay for the time, because as I said, it's better than just not having any kind of opportunity at all, obviously. But I don't see them being really sustainable or really, frankly, all that relevant these days because, in-person craft fairs have come back pretty strong. And a lot of people said that their 2023 numbers were kind of down. So, that's disappointing, but yet there's no doubt about it that in-person craft fairs are kind of here to stay again. They've come back and they're here. The 2023 economy just in general was difficult on a lot of people. Okay. So I think people's expendable income across the board was a little bit tighter than normal. So I don't know that it was just something that was specifically tied to craft fairs, or just really the economy in general was a little bit hard on people, and there just wasn't a whole lot of expendable income for a lot of people. But anyways, circling back to this particular question, the virtual vendor events are definitely not as common as they were during the quote unquote lockdown years that we experienced. Um, so I would encourage you to, instead of trying to find these virtual events, I would challenge you to work on building up your own social media following and going live on your own platform. Okay, so doing a live presentation on your Facebook page or TikTok or whatever it might be. Um, show off any new products that you're rolling out, or even some discontinued designs. Maybe have some discounts on those as a way to kind of move the older stock. This is going to be a more ideal way to make sales rather than virtually, because there's a few reasons. For one thing, you're going to be in full control if you do your own live presentation. Okay, so you can set things up the way that you want to. It's going off of your rules. You're not part of a virtual vendor event where there's their guidelines to worry about, and you have to kind of conform and adapt to what that event is supposed to be for each vendor. So you can kind of do things your way and have things customized to you. The other thing that I would say is just, keep trying to put your trust in the in-person events, because really nothing can replace that in-person connection that you can make with a shopper. All right, so when they start asking you questions about either your products or what inspired you to become a vendor or an artist, there's really no replacing that like in-person dialogue and connection. So like I said, if you want to do something virtual, I would highly, highly recommend that you do it on your platform with your audience who's already interested in you as a specific vendor, rather than people who might not be interested in what you do at all. And they're kind of just there in general as a general fan of arts and crafts and things like that. I think you're just more likely to kind of establish sales with the people who are already connected to you in some way. Okay, now her second question is a really, really good one. Very excited to talk about this one. So it is there an optimal booth location when doing an inside vendor event? Along the wall, on a corner, in the middle of a row, etc. So we're going to use this layout that I had made up for one of my events. Okay, so this is pretty much like a very, very basic indoor layout where on the bottom right corner here, you could see that there was an admission area. There was like 2 doors down here and then 2 doors over here, and people would come in, pay their admission at the booth here, and then walk through and enter the hall. Okay, and the hall was basically like a perfect square, so it was a really easy shape to work with. So at this particular facility, there was quite a few different wall booths for vendors and a lot of corners too, and that was really nice. So number one is a corner, and by a corner I mean that there's 2 different flows of traffic around the booth. Okay, so there was people that would kind of come in over here, and then people that would be able to walk through here. Okay, so you basically had 2 different directions of traffic facing opportunities of your booth. All right, so number 1 had it, number 3, number 5, 6, 7. I mean, there's so many different booths when you start looking around at this layout that had a corner opportunity. Okay, so I remember people liked this layout a lot. And then here in the middle of the hall, there were packs of 10 booths, packs of 12 booths, and then there was a large pack down here, okay, where there was about an 80-foot stretch, because these were 10 by 10s. Every single booth of this facility was a 10 by 10, except for the food area, all right? Now, I want to talk about a few different things to consider if you have the opportunity to pick your booth at an event. Some organizers will let the vendors select what type of booth, maybe the actual specific booth number, which is always kind of nice to get that much control as a vendor. So there's a few different things I just want to talk about and give you some food for thought, basically, the next time you're able to select your booth. So when people first walk in, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll kind of work around a perimeter. And a lot of times what we'll see people do is they'll kind of walk in and they'll just kind of gravitate towards these wall spots. All right, so in this particular case, it was very obvious that there was food and bar here, and there wasn't a lot of vendors until you hit 33, okay? So a lot of people were walking in and they were starting to their left. And that's one thing to consider. So If you are able to look at a booth map, take a look at when people enter, and is there booths on both sides? So does it start as vendor booths on both sides, or is there kind of like some different elements that aren't really part of the craft fair on one side? Um, so people are probably going to gravitate towards the craft fair booths because that's what they're there for, right? It's craft fair. So as they come in, they're coming down this way, a lot of them, and a lot of them just kind of continue on the wall and like make a loop around and then start to work their way into the middle sections. Sometimes you'll see people kind of just zigzag right from the start, but a lot of times people kind of just make like a loop, and then they'll kind of come through the center sections. So another thing to consider is, and I asked a lot of vendors about this, had a lot of conversations with vendors about this throughout the years, and asked them about their preference on being right up towards the front in the very beginning. So they're basically the first and the last thing that people see. Or do they like to be towards the back? Some people actually really prefer to be far in the back because some vendors have a theory that as shoppers come through a craft fair, they're coming in and they just want to browse a little bit. They want to be able to see a little bit before they start committing to actually making purchases. So some vendors stay away from these spots up front and they want to be towards the back, kind of in a premier spot. So maybe like these corners, sometimes the corners in the back are sought after. Again, because you have that two flows of traffic, right? And again, the reason is because they think that people aren't really going to start actually purchasing and spending until they get deeper into the layout. So that is also something to take into consideration, you guys, is there are quite a few vendors that kind of live by that theory. So now being in the middle of a row, in the middle of a show is probably, at least in my opinion, like the most difficult to stand out because there's, you're not on that initial wall where people are, going to be making those initial laps and things like that. And you got to do a lot to stand out when you're in the middle of a row. Okay. So these are probably the most challenging, like these, 69, 70, 85, 86, 80, 75, 53. Those types of booths might be the most challenging to, stand out. But there's people that enjoy that too. There's people that are kind of happy with that too. Keep in mind that if you're along a wall, sometimes you're able to use more vertical space than you would otherwise be able to if you were in the middle of a row. So sometimes when you're kind of like back to back with somebody, it gets a little bit tricky. It gets a little bit tricky on like how to, first of all, make your background not busy. Okay. So when somebody enters your booth, let's say you're in booth number 70. Okay. We're going to make this one a special color so it stands out. All right. So let's say you're in booth number 70. Now, what I always tell vendors to consider doing is to try to eliminate distractions at the booth. Okay. So when somebody's walking by, when a shopper is walking by, and let's say that they are kind of like interested in your booth and they're starting to get a little bit closer to where you are, you want them to be able to only really see your booth and experience your booth. So you're trying to kind of like eliminate what they're seeing behind you, what they're seeing beside of you, and you really only want them to see like what you're doing. Okay, so as far as closing your booth off, sometimes it can be tricky at an indoor event. Outdoor, it's much, much easier because basically everybody has canopies and tents. So all that you really have to do is put up your side walls and boom, you have like a nice closed in environment where there's very little distraction for people to kind of lose their attention span in your booth. Now, in an indoor event, sometimes you aren't able to use like a tent canopy. Sometimes you can, which is kind of cool. But if you can't, this is where you might want to start to get creative on how you can close in your booth. I've actually seen some vendors use their own pipe and drape. So, when you go to like a trade show, they have that the stanchion pipes set up that make it like a square, and there's like that draped fabric around a booth to close off each one. That's something that you can do. So I know that it's like an investment and it takes a little bit of time to set up, but if you're really looking to kind of enclose your space in and make it like your own environment, that could be what does the trick, So that can be one of the ways that you can overcome the challenge of having a middle row booth at a show. But getting back to the recommendation of which one I think is the best situation, I really do like the wall setups. They're very nice for a lot of reasons. One is that I truly believe that they get the most traffic, but also to have nobody behind you can be kind of nice. Sometimes when you're on a corner against a wall, you'll get a little bit of leeway from the event organizer with maybe you ask them about, can I put like a marketing banner besides my booth, even though it's kind of like outside my area? Sometimes you can work with the organizer on this. Now, I will say that you should never assume that you can do things like this, okay? Booth sizes are there for a reason, okay? So sometimes there's going to be seating arranged, or there just needs to be like a clear pathway of a certain size between booths due to the facility restrictions and rules. So these are the things that you want to clear with an organizer ahead of time. But sometimes, like I said, there is a little bit of leeway there on your booth size, so there's a lot of really nice things with booths that are against a wall. The next best situation I would say is a corner. And then as far as like where in the hall, the front, the back, personally, if it's me, if I'm a vendor that's paying a booth fee, I'm going to be I want to be towards the front. I want to make that initial impression on people. And as I said before, a lot of times if you're near the front, let's say for example, this 99 and 100 booth, these vendors are probably going to be seen by the same person at least twice. Okay. So a lot of times, okay, like I said, they'll walk in and they'll probably get a glimpse of you as they're walking in right here, but maybe they kind of just take a look at you and they start to make their way around. But as they prepare to, leave the event, they're probably going to see you one more time before they exit. Okay. And 2 passes, if you can't attract somebody to your booth in 2 passes, then it's just not meant to be. And that's okay. You got to live with that. But not all of these booths are going to get 2 passes from the shoppers. Okay. So as I said, some people just kind of make their way around and they go through just the one time. Now, let's say, for example, like booth 47, how would somebody be walking through the event where they would pass by this booth more than once? Whereas here, you have a very, very good opportunity of being seen more than one time. Okay, so that's another advantage, I think, of being like right up front if you can possibly get it. This is another reason, you guys, why I recommend that you sign up for shows. If you're interested in the show, sign up for it as soon as you possibly can. Don't delay, because a lot of times, if there is a possibility to work with the vendor on where you can be inside the facility, if you're getting in before all the other vendors get into this event and register, well then, you might have like first dibs on the layout or wherever you want to be. Now, again, please don't assume that all organizers are willing to do this. Okay. This is organizers that kind of go out of their way to really work with the vendors. They don't have to do this. You know what I mean? Because putting a layout together is very, very complicated. There's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration when you're an organizer and you're putting your layout together and you're assigning your vendor spots. You can't have vendors that sell similar things next to one another. And when you consider like all the different categories of arts and crafts, that in itself becomes very complicated, where you have 2 woodworkers, 2 candle makers, 2 jewelers, all this stuff. And by the time you start mapping out, you have to be really, really careful. So like I said, work with the organizer and just keep track of this, you guys. This is one fun thing to keep track of as you participate in craft fairs. Keep track of like where you are in facilities and how you think it did, how the response was, and did you get people who passed by you more than once, or did you pretty much just see new faces every time? These are the things that you can keep track of as you go, and it'll help you to determine like where inside of a hall you feel you should be. Okay, now let's go to a question from Eliana. So she asked, are there professional organizations for those of us who sell in craft fairs? So yeah, there's several of them out there, professional organizations for craft fair vendors. Some of them are considered, popular, like nationwide organizations. That can include the Craft Industry Alliance, the National Association of Independent Artists, and the American Craft Council. That one's pretty popular. That might be the most popular of them all. These organizations, they offer up resources, support, and also some networking opportunities for those in the craft fair industry. So those are some that you can kind of consider. I don't know offhand at this particular moment if there's any kind of membership fees or anything like that. I just know of them offhand, but do your research, see if you connect with any of them, and maybe you can join one and get some support and guidance on craft fairs. It's also kind of like a camaraderie thing. I think a lot of craft fair vendors are drawn to connecting with one another. So that's kind of like a nice perk with them, is that they're always like kind of community based and member based, so there's the opportunity to potentially connect with other vendors and things like that. So especially if you're in an area of the country or whatever where there's it's hard to connect with people. So some people live in really challenging climates. Some people live in really, really small, like rural areas where there just isn't like a big base of people to connect with. So these could be some good options for folks like that. All right. So this episode is running a little bit long compared to normal. So these were a handful of questions from channel members. And the membership has a few different perks that comes with it. One of them is the ability to submit questions to me that I can turn into these Q&A videos that hopefully, like I said, provide some insight on kind of the inner workings of craft fairs to get some more detailed feedback than I normally can give in a video. But channel memberships also come with the possibility of getting a booth review. So if you want to have your booth review, I definitely do that for channel members. I'm also going to give you all of my resources, my downloadable and printable resources that will help you with your next craft fair. So if you're interested, check out the join button below, and you can get a little bit more of an idea of what memberships are like. But yeah, with that being said, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this month's episode. If you got comments, drop them below, and be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching.